Symposium with Ash Aulak.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Symposium. Today we're lucky enough to talk about travel, and I'm happy to be joined by three friends, Lexie, Jay and Ryan. And they'll be talking about kind of where they've been, where they'd like to go, some of their interesting memories and favorite memories, and almost overall, why they travel and why it appeals to them. So if they could just take turns introducing themselves. Lexie?
I'm Lexie. So I wouldn't describe myself as a heavily seasoned traveller, but last year I went around several countries in Southeast Asia, and I also did Mount Kilimanjaro. I did both these on my own, but as part of a larger group of people that I hadn't met previous to the trip.
Okay. Jay?
Hi, I'm Jay. I also wouldn't necessarily say I'm the most seasoned traveller in the world. I've been around quite a bit of the States. I've done the Inca Trail in Peru. I've been around a fair bit of Europe, but I've not really gone that far into Asia. The furthest I've been east is Dubai.
Okay, and Ryan?
So hi there, I'm Ryan. I do travel quite often. It's just that because of the pandemic, we couldn't travel now. So it kind of stopped. But yeah, I traveled quite extensively last year. And I mainly did like Eastern Europe and also some places in East Asia. That's pretty interesting.
So
Yep.
I guess the first kind of question I have for you guys is what about traveling really appeals to you? So all of you have been to kind of far-flung places that a lot of people haven't had the chance to go to, especially from the UK. So there must have been something about those places that really attracted you or kind of encouraged you to spend time there. So I guess I direct the question first to you, Lexie. What is it about traveling that really appeals to you?
So I think last March when I did Kilimanjaro, obviously it was a huge sort of personal endurance thing more than anything else. And it was also a challenge that I'd set myself. But what's also really nice about something like that is you feel like you're making a very meaningful impact to the communities that you're visiting, because you've got porters that carry your bags, you've got the guides that take you up the mountain. So it's as far from being a sort of physical challenge, it's also a very enlightening and cultural experience as well. Also, last summer as well, when I went around Southeast Asia, so I went to Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam and Laos. Obviously, they're all culturally very interesting places and very, very distinct from Western culture, which is something that I think I look for in places that I travel to. So I suppose unlike some of the others, I prefer to go to places that are culturally more distinct from the West.
Right.
So I would just particularly point out as well, with somewhere like Cambodia, I suppose the history there was particularly interesting. So the legacy of Pol Pot and the massive genocide that occurred there in Cambodia is something that's very rarely spoken about in the West. So I think as a Western tourist, it was very enlightening to see that kind of genocide occur, because we hear a lot, as you say, about the sort of Holocaust and everything within schools. But it's nice to see how a genocide has occurred in a country very sort of geographically distant from our own.
I completely echo your sentiments there, actually, Lexie, because I was fortunate enough in 2015 to actually go to Siem Reap in Cambodia and see the kind of Angkor Wat temples and the killing fields, which is like I think what you're talking about.
Yes.
And that was quite a nice trip, because it was not the Khmer Empire and the subsequent Pol Pot dictatorship is not really something you encounter in school in the UK at all, beyond maybe a brief reference in the Vietnam War. And that was something that I was really happy to learn about. So I guess yeah, you're completely correct that travel can help us learn about things we otherwise wouldn't encounter. I mean, Jay, I direct it to you. You're well traveled. You were fortunate enough to go to Israel last year, and you've been to Peru, and obviously Israel for you has some significance because you're of Jewish origin. So I mean, what are the main reasons that you like to travel?
Well, I think probably like a lot of other British people, I started off just kind of going to places like Spain and going to the beach on holiday.
Yes.
When I was a child. And I think when you're very young, it's okay, but I very quickly got bored of doing those kind of trips.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I always had this sense of kind of adventure in me, and I wanted to go out and see new places. And I think even when I was on those traditional beach holidays, I would always make an effort to kind of try the food of the place and get a sense of, the sense of this idea that you're actually in a foreign country with a different culture.
Yeah.
And that's something I really, as I've gotten older and I've gone on my own holidays, that's really what I wanted to do. So obviously, as you mentioned, Israel, I went on a Birthright trip. So for those of you who don't know, Birthright is an organization. It's a charity which gives Jewish people between the ages of 18 and 24 the chance to go on a trip around Israel for free. And you're exposed to the history of the country. You pretty much get, in 10 days, a flying view of the entire country and its culture and its history. And I think for me, that was a really interesting kind of trip because, as Lexie says, there's this idea of being exposed to the historical parts of the country. And I think what I loved about that trip was I got to experience the history, the Jewish culture, my own ties as a Jewish person, and what that means. And I think that's something, especially, for example, when you go to Jerusalem, you see kind of what's historically speaking the holiest site in Judaism. And as someone who's not a religious Jew, I went there and I got this very strange feeling from being kind of in the presence of the Wailing Wall. And I think there is something in traveling where you can, at the risk of sounding pretentious and sounding like those Instagram kind of gap year people, I think there is this chance of you can kind of learn something more about yourself from going to a place.
I mean, thanks. So, I mean, that's interesting as well, because that maybe leads less from kind of Lexie's point about learning about kind of physical things and historical events, maybe turning it more inwards and learning about yourself, which is really interesting.
I'd just like to sort of kind of reinforce some of the things that Jay has said there. Obviously, as a child, especially living in Britain, it's kind of very sort of typical, you go on your summer holiday in Spain or somewhere in the continent. But usually it consists largely of just sort of sitting on a sunbed, as it were. But I think traveling definitely gives you independence and responsibility. And I think for people of our age, often it can be the first sense of actually properly having to look after yourself, properly having to be very aware of your surroundings, because sometimes the countries that you go into can be a bit dangerous. So you've got that elevated risk level. I mean, as a female as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, Ryan, I direct that to you just in the sense that you've been to some quite obscure places that maybe didn't have kind of Western style political systems, that maybe were still in under more kind of maybe dictatorial or less free societies, where perhaps your awareness of your surroundings was essential. So why do you travel, and what have you learned about going to those kind of places?
So I guess the main motivation started when I was like 5 or 6. So my parents bought me this globe, with like every single country on it, and I was really curious. I searched it up on probably the Wikipedia and stuff like that, and it just got me like, why not visit every single country? Like that's probably like a valid life goal to achieve. So that it started there, and as I grew older, it's mainly not just about every country, but echoing both Jay and Lexie, like it's about increasing your exposure, like broadening your horizon. Because I feel like when you go to countries, like for example, I've been to Turkmenistan, all right?
Right, that's like not somewhere many people have been to from the UK.
Yeah, it's a very mysterious country. Like nobody talks about it. Like everyone just says it's like, oh, it's when I ask people about what's there in Turkmenistan, they only say, oh, it's probably just desert or camel, and so people who know a bit of history know that it's a dictatorship, so I guess I'm really fascinated by the sort of culture and language of different countries. And it's also like a personal challenge for me, because sometimes, not for Turkmenistan, but like for some other countries, I do travel like by myself. So I have to take care of myself, and it's very I'm very curious. I'm a very curious person. So whenever I go to like these places, I always like to draw like different comparisons between, let's say, the UK or Hong Kong, where I've both lived at, with this country I'm currently at the moment. So sometimes I do find lots of differences, like not only in political systems, freedoms, but also the way people live, like their hobbies, For example, like in Turkey, you have people having shisha and cigarette every afternoon, literally, with like blackgammon and Turkish coffee.
Yeah.
So it's quite diverse, but at the same time, I also find like there's lots of similarities among these countries. Like we're all people after all.
Yeah.
And there are certain common traits that we can find that is quite amusing in itself.
So I mean, that's really interesting. Thank you for that, because that kind of links what everyone said all together about both about introspective and external kind of learning, and then perhaps the desire to satisfy curiosity. So I guess those examples lead me to the question about what are some of your favorite places that any of you have visited? Where have you particularly enjoyed visiting? What are your happiest or favorite memories of travel? So I mean, I direct that, I think, to Lexie first.
So I'd say I've kind of alluded to it heavily in my previous words, but when I went to Tanzania and did Kilimanjaro, I'd say that's probably one of the best weeks I've ever had, if I'm being entirely honest, because it's obviously you're with sort of 6 other people from Western cultures. So there was, I think, 4 people from the UK and then a few from Australia and America.
Yeah.
So you obviously develop a very strong connection with those people through the challenge, as it were. But you also develop a very strong relationship with the Tanzanians, which are guiding you up the mountain. And I just found the physical and mental strength of these guides. It was absolutely phenomenal. And all of us tourists were in total awe of them, quite frankly. Like, some of them could be running up the mountain and they'd be carrying heavy bags on their back, and it was really quite astonishing. But also what I found so rewarding about that is feeling like you were making a real difference, which I did mention previously. Like, you knew that any money that you spent there was going directly to the people that had helped make your experience such a nice one.
Yeah.
I'd also say that when I went to Laos, I think that was a very I think that's one of the Asian countries that's probably less often spoken about as well.
Yeah.
But there was really some areas of absolute outstanding natural beauty, lagoons. Just even when you were sort of on the bus or on the coach, just driving past, you just saw some absolutely wonderful sights. And I think often some of these countries that are less heavily publicised within media and within Western culture can often actually be some of the more interesting and beautiful countries in actual fact.
Yeah, I think that's entirely the case, just because not only do you get the actual natural beauty itself, but you perhaps have the surprise and the kind of awe of finding something that you didn't expect to see, or perhaps finding something that you didn't know was there, which is perhaps more awe-inspiring than coming across something beautiful that you at least had some idea was there in the first place. Yes. So with somewhere mysterious like Laos, you perhaps had no idea what you were going in for when you went, but then encountering that, as you say, natural beauty was perhaps a lovely surprise. I mean, and I'd link it to then, Jay, I mean, similarly with you, what are your favourite memories of travel?
So while Lexie was speaking, I think I thought of 3 that I could really narrow it down to.
Yeah.
So the first one would be the Masada in Israel.
Okay.
So I say we hiked it. It's about a 20-minute hike up the mountain. It's very easy, but we did it for sunrise.
Right.
And when we got to the top of the mountain, there was a kid having a bar mitzvah.
Oh wow. Okay.
So it was, and then everyone just started singing and dancing on the top of like this mountain in the middle of the desert with the Dead Sea in the background, and the sun was rising. So it was one of those experiences I don't think you could really recreate. It was just timed perfectly, and it felt very surreal. I think that's kind of one of the things I do love about traveling, is that you can just luck out and have these moments that you're just never going to have again.
So the kind of unplanned nature of those kind of spontaneous moments. Yeah,
because I think being there would have been cool, but being there while there was a bar mitzvah was just completely just an extreme experience, and it was so fantastic. Another one I really loved was when I went to the Amazon, which is interesting because I know Lexie said that Kilimanjaro was kind of her highlight, and this was the trip where I also did the Inca Trail, and I think that was kind of, while I was planning it, that was really the star of my trip, and that was what I was expecting to be the highlight, and I did love it, but I absolutely just loved going to the Amazon. I found that to be the most incredible part of the trip. I think because it was just a completely different world from anything I'd ever seen before. Because for me, I'd kind of walk around a forest and think of that as nature.
Yeah.
And here I am, kind of 6 miles down a river in the middle of South America with like, caiman, anteaters, all of which I saw. And that was really fascinating. And also, while we were in the middle of the Amazon, there was a thunderstorm.
Oh wow.
So you had these like 100-foot trees. Some of them were falling over, and it was a terrifying experience. It was really, really cool. It was exciting. It's something I do remember.
I mean, similarly, I guess similar to what Lexie said about Kilimanjaro, I assume the Inca Trail was a bit of a physical challenge as well. So you had the rewarding nature of that as well, and perhaps also, especially linking what Lexie said about Kilimanjaro, you also had the local guides who I assume you felt indebted to.
Oh, see, if I'm going to be completely honest, I've spoken to Lexie about this actually. With the Inca Trail, I actually felt almost a little bit bad for the local guides because it was very obviously our trip was run by I can't remember the name of an international organization,
like a travel agency.
Yeah, and the only time really the guides got any recognition was at the very end in this tip ceremony, which was it felt very forced and it felt almost condescending. I mean, don't get me wrong, these local people are incredible because I would be huffing and puffing up a mountain and they'd be running past me with like huge like tents on their backs. But I do definitely think that, I don't know how we could do it, but there should be some way to ensure that the money, I think, of the Inca Trail, because I mean, it's not cheap, goes more to protecting kind of the local communities in Cusco rather than being filtered out to these international organizations.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of want there to be more recognition of the local people. I mean, Lexie, you said you have something to say about that as well.
Yeah, no, the tipping ceremony, me and Jay have spoken about this before. I think it's quite a common feature of these kind of like trips. But I think coming from a Western culture, especially British culture, where people are quite reserved about money and don't want to make a big thing of giving tips, having a tipping ceremony is quite an awkward experience.
Yeah,
entirely
I can
honest.
imagine so. Yeah,
because they're literally counting how much money that you've given them, and you almost want to be discreet about it, being so like demonstrated so openly and kind of almost they start dancing and singing.
I guess especially so given in kind of British culture, your tipping is done discreetly and it's not really something you talk about, and it's just something you kind of do.
The issue is as well, on my trip, it was me and my friend were the only British people on it and the rest were Americans.
Right, okay.
So the tip, they love tipping. They're very keen to do it. But as a Brit, it was the most awkward thing, and everyone was speaking about how much they tipped, and everything about me being a Brit doesn't like that.
I mean, because Brits we tip, but then we don't really talk about how much is like more treated as kind of being crass. So
yeah.
I mean, Ryan, what are some of your kind of favorite memories of travel? Because those two experiences that Lexie and Jay have spoken about are quite similar, but you've been to some really, really obscure places. So have you got any favorites from some of those?
Definitely, I have. So they're mostly in like Eastern Europe or like Central Asia type of areas.
Yeah.
So I'll probably name just 2 or 3. I can think of my mind. So one of them is Bulgaria. I'd say the nature there is fabulous, especially like there's a place called the Seven Rila Lakes. Like, all of you should just check it out. It's marvelous. The people there are also very friendly, very hospitable, I have to say. Next up, let me see, probably Ukraine. I really like the architecture of like all these Orthodox churches and stuff like that. It's just quite enlightens me when I see them, with all these different colors. And the final one, I'd probably say Kazakhstan.
Okay, that's a very obscure place.
Yeah, because not only is the nature very diverse, so you've got like snow-capped mountains on one side, and you've got complete desert, and also you've got like canyons, grasslands, like steppes, a bit like Mongolia, with nomadic people. But there's also like a very interesting blend between like Turkic nomadic culture, like the Kazakh culture, and like its Soviet past.
Right. So there's more kind of the clash between the Russian Slavic culture and then the Turkic culture.
Yeah, that's right. And I find it quite an interesting combination, really.
So how did that clash manifest itself? Were there kind of signs written in both languages, or kind of was it manifested in the cuisine, or how did you? What are some of the best examples you have of that clash of cultures?
All of the things you've mentioned, actually. So, for example, food. I guess it depends on the area. So the main cities, for example, like Almaty, like the main one, like Shymkent, they're very Russian. So when you go into these cities, you can mostly find Russian food. And people that only speak Russian, actually, I don't really think they speak Kazakh.
Right.
But once you leave the cities, like you go out to like live in yurts and stuff like that,
yes.
They're all Turkic with camels and stuff like that. And the cuisine is surprisingly different. So instead of like borscht and the traditional Russian type of food, you have, for example, very big round sort of bread that you share with like your whole family. And then they've got like tea. Oh yes, there was this thing called camel milk, which was
oh wow,
super sour.
Yeah.
But it's worth a try, I'd say.
I mean, those Central Asian areas have always fascinated me because I've read recently the book called The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, and that he speaks there about how, especially linking to what we've said before about how Western education is maybe sometimes lacking in other cultures. He speaks there about the kind of Central Asian cultures of the Silk Roads that shaped history in areas like Samarkand, etc. Or along that kind of Central Asian belt that you've been to. So I'd always really interested in those areas. I mean, what is it about those areas that initially attracted you to go there? Because that's obviously, as we've said, not something that not a place that someone in the UK would just naturally gravitate to in the way they would maybe somewhere in the Anglosphere or Europe.
So I guess this more or less has to do a bit of my upbringing. So
okay,
how should I put it? Like I am familiar with both like Hong Kong and the UK. Yeah. So age is like more of like in the middle, Eastern Europe.
Right. Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
See like what's like in between. Like, is there really something in common I can find among the two places I'm familiar with?
Yeah, I know, that's really interesting. So it's almost geographically in between them you have the kind of Silk Road areas.
Yeah, that's right. And I think they're also quite linked, like not only like in the economy, geopolitics, but also like language, people, like even genetically you might be linked. So
yeah, that's interesting.
Sparked my interest. Yeah.
I mean, and then I directed again to Lexie and ask, other than kind of your more favorite memories, what are some of your more interesting or even intrepid or even slightly scary memories you've had while traveling?
Yeah, so I am obviously blonde and blue-eyed and
right.
very clearly British. So and also I look quite young as well. So when I do sort of go abroad, people do sort of look at you twice. And to give an example, I was in a hotel in Sri Lanka actually. But there was a group of local Sri Lankan boys. They may have even been staff. I wasn't entirely sure. But Sri Lankan lads, probably about 5 years older than I was at the time.
Right.
And then they all suddenly, rushed towards me. I was sitting on the sunbed at this point, and they all wanted a selfie with me. And, having never engaged any prior conversation with them, it was very strange, quite frankly.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Probably quite scary as well.
But it does feel weird. And then also, I've been in situations where I've been in markets, and you get a sort of the local person behind the market still not shouting. That's probably an exaggeration, but sort of calling beautiful lady as you walk past, and like that.
I'm for the listeners who don't know what I look like, I'm ethnically Indian. So even though I'm British, I look like I'm Indian. And what happened to me when I went to China in 2018, I went to Beijing and then Xi'an, which is in kind of central mainland China, where they don't really have many outsiders or non-Chinese people. Locals similar to kind of Lexie would congregate around me, ask for selfies, or literally just stand next to me without even talking to me and just ask one of their friends to take a picture of me next to them. I think it might also because I'm quite tall. I think that might have been something. Yeah. But Yeah, that was a bit odd, because that wouldn't really happen in maybe a Western country.
Yeah, and there was another experience as well. I mean, it was partly derived from my own stupidity, quite honestly. But when I was in Cambodia, me and some of the others who were on this particular tour that I was on went to a local nightclub, as it were. Yeah. But I was sort of getting a bit kind of bored, sort of, wanting to go to bed, a bit tired.
Yeah.
So I decided to walk back to the hostel on my own.
Oh, that's okay,
this was
right.
in Phnom Penh. And it was about midnight at the time. So I sort of walked out, and I wasn't entirely sure kind of what direction I was supposed to go in. And I wasn't drunk either, which makes it even worse that I thought this was a good idea. And I spoke to some sort of Western looking tourist who turned out to be an Aussie. And I asked him, do you know where such and such hostel is? And then the guy was getting all quite creepy, quite frankly, and was sort of saying, I can walk you back there, and all kinds of things like that. And it's just experiences like that when you're in a foreign country, somewhere that you're unfamiliar with, that is a bit, not completely safe, that you sort of a little bit hyper anxious, I'd say. You have to sort of be extra cautious in terms of valuables and everything. So there was a girl as well who was on the trip, and she had, her phone and her passport and her purse all nicked, because they can be very sneaky about it.
I mean, I've had those experiences in India, which is my kind of ancestral country. There is a lot of risk there of kind of theft and looking after your belongings. So it's always a bit of a culture shock, perhaps, when you go from a place where perhaps you take more for granted your physical possessions, and you end up in a country that where obviously your possessions are considered to be far more luxurious than they are in your home country, and thus you're perceived perhaps as a target. So I mean, I direct then question to Jay. I don't assume that you've had any kind of similar terrifying experiences that Lexie detailed there, but I mean, just interesting experiences that maybe perhaps were not your favorites, but were very odd at least. Have you got any?
Actually, I think I'm kind of talking in the same kind of vein as Lexie, because when I went to Peru, in particular when I went to Lima, and I think obviously when you're going to a capital city, you kind of have this maybe naive expectation that it's going to be very developed and kind of be the richest part of the richest part of the country. And I think when I got there, I got a bit of a culture shock, and for me it was maybe as like kind of the ignorant Western traveler, I was quite terrified, and I was very aware of, that I've got my phone on me, and that I think I was very cautious about everything I did, which was the first time I ever felt that in a foreign country.
Yeah.
So for example, this was the first morning actually in Peru. It was probably 9 a.m. and we were walking along the beach, and this old man was following us. And he goes, guys, and he gets a huge thing of cocaine out, and tries to sell it to us at like 9 a.m. in the morning. And I was just thinking, oh my God, what the hell have I let myself in for in this country? But yeah, that was probably the time where I've really actually been quite nervous. I think another time actually was when I went to, this was quite a few years ago, when I went to the Bahamas. I remember I was probably, I was 14 at the time, so I was quite young.
Yeah.
And I remember there were police walking around with these absolute just massive guns.
Yeah.
And I remember it absolutely terrified me. I think I actually said to my parents, like, can we please go back to the hotel? But I think it's kind of what we were saying earlier about what Lexie said about how when you're traveling, it's kind of your first time alone looking after yourself. I think going somewhere like Peru really did help me kind of grow up and feel a lot more comfortable as a person, because you have to learn very quickly how to go about in these kind of countries and be safe and act in a way that doesn't make you look like a prime suspect. A prime target. Yeah.
I mean, Ryan, you've gone to some places where not only could you perhaps be feared by other people, but maybe even the governments or the regimes of the countries themselves. So, I mean, have you ever had any kind of scary or very odd experiences abroad?
Yeah, there's definitely one that springs to mind. So that happened in Kosovo, which debatable whether it's a country. I mean, to the Serbs, they're not. If you ask, let's say, Albanians, they are.
Right.
So yeah, it's like a partially recognized country. So I went to this city in the northern part of Kosovo called Mitrovica, I think that's the name. So it's a very divided town. So there's a river in between. So the southern part is fully Albanian. So it's controlled by the Republic of Kosovo government, like the self-declared government. Whereas in the north, it's controlled by Serbia. All right. But it's still kind of actually part of Kosovo. So what I did was that there was a bridge between the two sides, and there was like full of like UN police, so we had to like give passports to them and stuff like that, which is fine. I went across to the Serb. By the way, I was the only guy who was on the bridge, because you can see the conflict is quite evident even to this day. So I went to the Serbian side, and then what happened was that I probably chose quite a wrong timing to go there, because at that time, I think it was when the Kosovo Albanian government announced that they would create an army for their own country. So the Serbs were kind of agitated and on high alert, basically. So when I was in the Serbian part, I just randomly took some photos like off the street.
Yeah.
And when suddenly 5 men, muscular Slavic men, all right, rushed out.
Wow. Okay. It sounds like a movie.
Me. Yeah, they literally surrounded me and talked to me in Serbian, which I have no idea what they're talking about. So I guess what they were saying. So I interpreted it as they want to delete my footage, so I complied.
Yeah.
And luckily there was a guy who knew a bit of English. So he explained that it was sort of like a half government sort of building. I think it's actually a bank, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, they were quite aggressive, and they even asked for like my passport, what I'm here for, what I'm doing. I think one guy even kind of accused me for being like a Western spy or something.
Oh wow, okay, that's quite the accusation.
Like CIA, whatever, which is like complete nonsense.
Yeah.
But luckily I managed to persuade them, so it was all fine at the end, and they let me leave without any hassle.
I mean, that's fairly terrifying. I mean, because
it is.
Yeah. That sounds like almost a mortal, where you put in kind of mortal peril. I mean, I haven't got anything comparable to that, but I do have instances where I went to the Punjab, where my family originates from in India, and my grandparents come from. And when you go there is very little in the way of, modern infrastructure. I mean, some parts of the area. I mean, most of the places now are actually quite developed with Wi-Fi and roads and everything. But you go out into the sticks and it's just pure kind of rural villages. And and it's quite a culture shock, as you guys have said. And things you took for granted, like hot running water, you don't often find there, or washing machines, just basic kind of white goods like that, you don't really encounter. So it does lead to a sense of self-sufficiency. I remember first time we went to India, first time I probably remember going, I think I was about 7, and my mum took a load of just tinned food from the UK, so tinned tuna, baked beans, a load of stuff just to help us kind of survive in the Punjab for a week or so. So yeah, I mean, that's quite a culture shock. I mean, Lexie, you also have other experiences that were maybe slightly unnerving.
Yes. So another one was, as I said, when I was going to do the hike in Kilimanjaro, I flew into the main airport in Tanzania. The name escapes me, but there was this quite a significant transfer between the airport to the accommodation that we were staying in for the first night. So obviously it's quite remote, the mountain and everything. So before I'd arrived, I'd pre-booked a taxi to collect me from the airport. And I was on my own, which I mean was a little bit unnerving as it was. But I saw the taxi driver was there, and I got in the taxi, and it all kind of was fine initially. But then as it was about 5 minutes into the journey, and the driver just sort of pulled to the side of the road, and he got out the car, he got some money out, and gave it to this to this other dude who'd stopped from his car as well.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, am I, going to be kidnapped or something? And it was,
okay.
it was very unnerving. And I was just absolutely terrified. I kind of froze almost. I was like, what exactly am I supposed to do right now? But no, fortunately, it was nothing, and the guy just drove on. But you can see how, in your head, 1 + 1 can kind of add up, and you think, oh, well, what's going on here?
I guess it's almost about being kind of sensible, especially when you're alone. As you've said, it instigates a lot of responsibility, but then you also are more vulnerable, I guess, alone. So I think, at least my advice, based on how much I've traveled to others who haven't yet, is if you're going to somewhere you're less familiar with, then do try and go with people. Perhaps not too many, to avoid kind of losing the opportunity to learn about yourself, but obviously don't take unnecessary risks either. I think Lexie's kind of nightclub Cambodia story is illustrative of maybe pushing the bar too far in terms of independence.
Yeah.
I mean, Jay, you had something else to add about some unnerving experiences you've had?
Yeah, mine was actually in a place that you wouldn't really think of having many unnerving experiences. I went to San Diego with my parents. It's,
right.
a developed city.
You traveled very extensively in the United States.
Yeah, and we were speaking to someone who said something about there was some overlook or something where you could stand and kind of look into Mexico. So my parents and I thought, okay, cool, let's drive down there, let's go and see what we could. We didn't obviously bring our passports with us. We didn't really think about going in because, to put it bluntly, the Mexican border area is not really where you want to hang around.
Right.
And we were driving, and before we knew it, we're in a huge queue of traffic, and there's no exit. And the only thing in front of us is the border control for the entrance into Mexico. And it actually was quite terrifying. It almost looked like a dystopian. It's like a huge, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's like a huge wall. Like Donald Trump would be very proud. It's really quite like intimidating. And we were driving, and just before we got there was one thing in the side of the road which was missing. So my dad just quickly made a turn for it, and we had to drive back really fast. But I was absolutely crapping myself. I was so scared. I just had this image of kind of being arrested and being questioned by the US border police, thinking we were drug smugglers or something.
Oh, wow.
Which sounds ridiculous, but I do think, it shows that even in a country that, you think would be pretty, you'd expect to not really have any experiences of that sort, I think you can end up doing stuff like that.
I mean, that sounds quite terrifying. So I guess on that, based on all that we've said, I guess the next question is places that you want to go to that you haven't had the chance to go yet, or places that are attractive to you that you not had the chance to visit. So I guess I direct the question to Ryan. You're already very well traveled, but are there any places you've not been to yet that are on your list?
Yeah, there are many actually, but I'll particularly highlight 2 regions. So one of them is South America. I haven't been there yet.
Right.
And from what I've heard,
neither have I.
Yeah, it seems very interesting, like Peru and Brazil, Argentina, etc. So that's definitely on the very top of my bucket list, I'd say. The second region, probably I would combine all these Pacific islands. For example, like Tuvalu, Fiji.
Oh, wow, yeah, very remote places.
Yeah, and also ultimately Antarctica.
Oh, wow, okay. Oh, to get there from Chile, to take the Chile.
Yeah,
route.
that's one option. Yeah, I think from Tierra del Fuego. Yeah.
Tierra del Fuego, right. Yeah. I'd love to go to Argentina as well, because I think their beef and their barbecue is legendary. So I'd like to get a taste of that if I can. Their steaks. And Brazil I'd always wanted to go to, because I've been to kind of the other 2 massive population countries of India and China. So I'd love to see how Brazil is kind of compares to those. And it's got a lot of kind of geographical marvels, like the city of Rio, which has the famous favelas, etc. So I'd love to go there, especially after seeing the film City of God, which was an amazing film. Thanks, Jay.
You're welcome.
Lexie, are there any strong places on your bucket list that you've not had the chance to visit?
Yeah, so being quite sort of an active person, I'd sort of be very much interested in doing sort of a hike again. So obviously what Jay has done, the Inca Trail appeals to me. Maybe Everest Base Camp at some point.
That's quite cool.
but also I'm quite a keen swimmer as well. And they have there's this organisation called Swim Trek, and they organise swimming holidays across various parts of the globe, to be honest. So they do swimming holidays in the Galapagos, for example, or in Croatia, and that's definitely something that I'd like to do, a little bit sort of different and a little bit of a kind of curveball there. But no, I definitely like to see more of South America, but obviously being a lone female, that's something that I'm probably just conscious of in South Africa. South America.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously there's lots of things, but I'm sort of very much sort of waiting to see what's going to happen in terms of government advice and everything relating to coronavirus, and then maybe hopefully I'll be able to book something before the university term recommences. But in such an unpredictable climate, you don't know what's going to happen and which countries are going to be green and amber on the traffic light system or whatever Boris has come up with.
Yeah, I mean, Jay, similar to you, same question essentially. Where would you like to go that you've not been to?
Well, you know what my number one is. I'd like to go to Japan. That's been on the top of my bucket list for a couple of years now. I mean, it should be interesting because I don't particularly like fish. So, but obviously, I would enjoy Wagyu beef, but I somehow don't think I could afford to have an entire trip where I eat nothing but Wagyu beef. But that's been on top of my bucket list for years. To be honest, my kind of plan was to try and go next year after the Olympics, but now obviously they've moved the Olympics, so that might not be happening now because I don't know if anyone's ever looked at it, but it's very expensive. You're looking about £1,000 for a direct flight to Tokyo.
Yeah,
it's pretty extortionate. I think more locally, to be honest, at this moment in time, I'd probably limit my travels to kind of the closer areas just because of you never really know what's going to happen in the world at this moment in time. But I'd like to go to Iceland because it's kind of a known thing that if you're watching a film that's set on another planet, more often than not they film it in Iceland. It's completely different. I'd love to try and see the Northern Lights. I think it would just be such a fascinating kind of combination of a hiking holiday and just a generic kind of sightseeing. And also I'd like to go to Berlin, just because I've never been to Germany.
Yeah, I mean Berlin's brilliant because of the history and the wall and the Devil's Tooth, but also just because of the doner kebabs, which are amazing. Also,
that's the reason I want to go.
Yeah. Also, I went to Finland actually on the topic of the Northern Lights. I was lucky enough to go to Finland in 2012 to Inari, past the Arctic Circle, and I think Lexie would enjoy that because it was a very kind of physically intensive trip. We did a lot of cross-country skiing, a lot of snowshoeing, so there was a lot of exercise. And yeah, we were fortunate enough to do husky sledding and seeing the Northern Lights, and that was something that I guess in the way that we've spoken about was something I'd not really predicted that I'd be able to do, and it was something completely different to just being in the UK. So yeah, I'd love to go to Iceland, especially for all the geothermal stuff as well.
Yeah. Did the Northern Lights live up to your expectations?
Well, they were when we went, they weren't as intense as they were at some times of the year, but they looked way less green than they do on photos. I think the camera makes them less green. It was more kind of like almost like clouds, but far more fluid and beautiful than clouds, and far more fast moving, but almost grayer and bluer than you'd see perhaps on camera. At least that's what I perceived. So I guess I'd finish off again with Ryan, just to finish overall the episode.
Yep.
I mean, so you kind of want to go to the South Pacific and South America. Is there a kind of third overall region you really want to go to, and perhaps could explain a bit why?
Probably I'd say West Africa, because it's quite less well known compared to other regions, and also obviously it's culturally quite fascinating with like all these different tribes and languages and stuff like that. So yeah, probably like near the Sahel region, probably countries like Togo, Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone. Yeah, that's probably third on my bucket list, I'd say.
Nigeria sounds like a cool destination because it's quite developed now compared to what most people consider Africa to be, and Lagos specifically is somewhere I'd really love to go. So yeah, I mean, those all sound like really cool places. So yeah, I mean, thanks all. I mean, I hope you enjoyed listening, and I really did, and I enjoyed listening to the experiences and Lexie's interesting foreign excursions, as well as Jay and Ryan's quality stories about being abroad. So I hope you tune into the next episode of the Symposium, and see you next time. Cheers.
The Symposium with Ash Aulak.